really got started when my wife and I went to a sustainability session that was held at the Rosamond Gifford Zoo back around 2005. And one of the people giving a talk there was Janet Allen. And at that point, we've been doing a little bit of gardening. We have a small yard in Dewitt. And sort of switching over to perennials, it made more sense. And yet they were dying and not doing well. And we sort of thought, it's got to be something. There got to be plants that like to live in central New York. You know, we're surviving here. There have to be plants that can survive here too. And then Janet talked about all the native plants and sort of, this is what we have to try. So I'm going to take you through what my yard looks like now, what it looked like back then, and then in like 3 or 4 areas of the yard, what we went through in the process of developing native plant gardens, what we found worked and didn't work, what screwed up along the way, what we learned along the way, which was, I think, quite a lot. And I hope you enjoy seeing some of this. And if I do it without taking too much time, we'll have time for some of your questions of things that I don't cover. So let me go to the share screen. And here is now, this is a Google Street image taken in July 2023. You can see down in the corner here, I hope, if this is showing up, both the time of year, July, and let me go back one, and the year. So for all my images, I'm trying to throw that in there so you have an idea of the progress and the things that we did along the way. So to say this was this year, you can barely see the house back here a little bit. Lots of garden around here, but it didn't all happen at once. So here are some of the questions that I hope to give you some idea of answers to as we go through this. First, how did we start changing lawn into native plants? What was there when we started? What were the conditions that we started with? The soil conditions, the light conditions, all of this made some difference, although it took me a while to figure that out. What worked and didn't work. And there were some things that we've essentially given up on that didn't work. And then also, I sort of wanted to emphasize, how does it look at different times of the year? Because I think a lot of the things that you see, oh, these are really pretty looking plants, but that's just one picture, and what happens over time, and how can you develop something that you can enjoy throughout the year. So I'm going to start by, maybe blocked at the top, it says a trip through the Wayback Machine. So this is another street view from just over 10 years ago. Here's 2011. The plants are smaller. You can see some of the house now. You go back to 2007 at the bottom, and now you have just a very small tree, the leaves changing color. That's a red maple that we planted after a Norway maple died in the infamous 1998 Labor Day storm. And right in front of it is a little teeny lilac that we just put in, standard lilac, not native, I know, but it smells wonderful and the neighbors all love it. And just a few other plants here. So here's what we were starting with. This is 2006. So how did we then transform yard into plants? We started laying out sticks, which you can see a little more easily here, and wanted to have some paths still in the grass and have some areas of garden. And of course, it had to be something that the kids could enjoy and the dog could enjoy. And as it turned out, the area that says garden here under the tree never did turn into garden. That was a shady place in the yard and a nice place to sit chairs out in the shade in the summer. So eventually we just gave up on never turning that into garden, except that as the tree grows, the mulch ring around it gets larger. Back here along the house, you see some yews, other foundation plantings, all pretty much all non-native perennials. So here's what it looks like from the porch looking out toward the street. And then when we started actually planting, we dug up the stretch right along this front walk. And what we found was it was hard digging. Thin soil, sort of clay loam soil with a lot of rocks in it. It's glacial till underneath, so you can get down 2 or 3 inches and then you hit rubble. And we were thinking about, oh, what should we do to improve the soil? But then reading books, listening to Janet Allen, the advice was don't change it. So we didn't do any additions to the soil. We used a little mulch to keep down the weeds at first, but not very much. What I didn't know at first was that the pH is pretty alkaline. It's a lot of limestone around, so we're in the 7 to 7.5 range. And it turns out some of the plants that we've used over the years haven't grown well, probably because the soil was a little bit too alkaline. Something, if I was starting over, I'd start by testing soil a little bit more. Fairly dry, damp, not very much. It's middling to dry in the front yard. Sun to part shade under the tree, but quite a lot of sun. We have a backyard that has a lot of shade, a lot of tree roots, and there's a whole different ball of wax. So here's what the first things that we planted along here. This is in June. Here it is in August of the same year. So you can see some things are blooming. This is a non-native. This purple is a non-native plant. Grasses that are growing up tall. By September, this turned out to be a big blue stem. We thought we had bought little blue stem, but it got very tall. It got taller and taller over the years. Very pretty though, lovely colors as it developed in the fall. It's a New York aster. And along here, prairie dropseeds, one of my favorite grasses, lovely little things. Note out here by the street, here's a Virginia rose, Rosa virginiana. Pretty small at this point. That's one of the things that grew too large. And you'll see in some other images, it probably wasn't the best place to put it. So here's September, that first year. And one of the things that we learned fairly quickly is, boy, the plants grow. You think you've got lots of room in here, and these plants really end up taking far more space in much shorter time than I expected. Prairie dropseed with its really pretty little seed heads. Very small baptisia here, which became quite a large plant and is still doing very well today. But down here, butterfly milkweeds, just planted, and by 1 year later, they're blooming, and we had a monarch butterfly. So that's one of the joys of this, is finding you plant these plants and suddenly other things start showing up and enjoying them, and the whole ecosystem becomes more complex and more interesting, I think. So that's been one of the real fun things of doing this. Here's in November, still that first year. Now the drop seeds have turned this lovely wheat color and still look interesting. And that's also been one of the fun things, is to have something that looks different at different times of the year. Here's the rose bush. The leaves turned yellow. Second year, now we started planting out by the sidewalk, put in a little patch by the driveway. But we didn't fill it all up at once either. Sort of had to wait and see how things did. These shrubs we had actually bought at the Garden in the Woods in Massachusetts just before starting this project. So that's a couple of hypericums, a couple of St. John's worts that were already there. So here it is, that second year when things have just been planted. This is in July. Nothing's doing very much. Some harebells here, some more milkweeds. By the next year in June, here you can see the cinquefoil here is blooming. The harebells are blooming purple. And we've added more plants. Prairie smoke, lovely plant. Unfortunately, now totally shaded out. But if you have a dry, rocky, gravelly, sunny place, it's a very interesting and lovely plant. Now here's July 2008, and that first garden is, you can see how much it's filling in. The big blue stem is much bigger. This palm sedge is taking up a nice patch of ground. And as the plants grew, we found we were really using little or no mulch. Sometimes you get some weeds that you have to weed out. On the other hand, it meant things would seed where they wanted to be. And so we've had plants moving all around the garden based on where they want to live, as long as there's some bare ground for those seeds. Out by the sidewalk, I added a log to make a sort of a fence along the sidewalk. And that's been fun. You'll see chipmunks running along it, kids walking down the sidewalk. It's sort of like a tunnel, and they'll always put their hand on the log as they go. So here's a close-up view a year later of that log and the little patch next to the sidewalk. Now we've added the liatris in here. Sneezeweed is blooming in September still. The liatris is still blooming. Phlox is still blooming. To some extent, though, how well these plants do depends on how wet a year it's been. So I don't usually water. And so there will be plants that do great some years and aren't as robust or don't grow as tall other years. Here, a couple of years later, but we're back in May. So this is fairly early in the year. Now you can see way over on the side, the prairie smoke is blooming, this lovely pink. And columbine, which we placed probably just in one place, has seeded itself around. So here's one, there's another one here, there's another one out there. And so whenever there's some bare ground and sunshine, you'll get these lovely native columbines, Aquilegia canadensis, popping up. You'll also notice back here, there's that Virginia rose that was so small back in 2007, and it gets huge. So I have to periodically cut this thing down almost to the ground, and it pops right back up and blooms very well in June. Not blooming now, it's in May. And it has a fairly short bloom time of only about a week, but it's very pretty well it does. So this is now taking a view from the top. I know it's a kind of fuzzy view. It again came from Google Earth. Here's the house, here's the street, and this gives you an orientation. So north is to the top of the screen here. The whole lot is on a downhill slope to the back of the house, about 20-foot drop from the surface of the road down to this water back here. It says Meadowbrook. It's really a combination of Meadowbrook, which goes through the east side of Syracuse, and a feeder canal for the Old Erie Canal. This all runs then behind the house. What I'm pointing out, though, is that there's a lot of shade. In the backyard, a big black willow, way down by the water, right in the backyard, huge silver maple that makes the whole backyard shady. And in the front, the red maple that we planted is getting bigger and shading gardens that we planted and we thought were going to be sunny. So we looked for more sun, and we had to jump to the other side of our driveway in a little patch that was still, the neighbors were okay with us considering this our yard, and we started gardening along here. What we did, though, to make sure that you could detect where our yard was and the garden was and still keep the neighbors happy with being able to mow their grass, was we lined the whole thing with bricks. We were fortunate to find some big paving bricks. They're not the normal bricks that you'd find on the wall of a house. They're twice as thick. So they go down into the dirt a ways and protect everything so that the grass stays out pretty much and the garden stays in pretty much. It gives a nice straight edge to it. So once you have some columbines and they start seeding around, then you can pick up those plants and move them other places. So here's a bunch of columbines that have been planted in here. And a real little blue stem, the thing that we thought we were getting to begin with, sneezeweed. One of the things we put in here, because we didn't want it to get too tall, was a cultivar of a New England aster. The New York aster did not live very long, wasn't very happy there. Well, we thought we'd try a New England aster out here. You can see here's in October, it's long gone. You have just seed heads left. This is a tall larkspur. beautiful purple flowers earlier in the late summer. And here is that sneezeweed, Helenium autumnale, still blooming back in all the way into October. These purple domes bloomed, but you can see how late it is in the season. And what we found was almost nothing visited them. Most of the insects were gone by then. So they were a little bit of a disappointment because asters are just seem to be something that everything is attracted to. Here you can see a columbine filling in as almost a ground cover, even at this time of year. And this pale gray-green is pussy toes, makes a wonderful ground cover in an open area. So here's, let's see, this was October 2012. Here's the next May. You can see how short everything is when it's just coming up. Here's that little blue stem. Lots of columbines just filling it. And the pussy toes are all blooming too. Nice early season in an open area for a ground cover to have that kind of bloom. This is a threadleaf coreopsis. There's some coneflowers back here. But we were getting tired of that purple dome. And so we started adding in from seed native New England asters. We went out to find some nice New England asters out there, get the seed heads, put them in the ground. And sure enough, way in the back here, you're starting to see coming up some taller New England asters. The purple domes have completely disappeared after about 3 or 4 years. And these guys will keep on seeding in. And so now they've taken over. We have some dill too, but I like dill. It's useful. Here in July, the pussy toes is not blooming anymore. The coreopsis has a very long bloom time. And way in the back, purple coneflower, which is a wonderful attractor for insects. We had just in that year and the next year, here's a red admiral, beautiful little sweat pea, bright green. Here was an eastern comma and a great spangled fritillary, all on those coneflowers. And then at the end of the year, when you just have seed heads left, the birds come down and pick at them. So you get goldfinches, especially loving those coneflowers. So now that was 2014. Here's 2015. The asters are coming in nicely. I'm thinking I'm going to get a nice bloom out of them. And now we have something else. A butterfly milkweed that we had planted on the other side has seeded in over here. It likes it sunny and dry, so it was happy. Okay, we'll let it be. Now, July 2017, the asters are getting really big. And you can see me sitting there, what am I going to do with these? So I had to start cutting them partway through the year. And so now I cut them usually in late June and again around this time in mid-July, so that they bush out and they still bloom just fantastically at the end of the season, but they don't get quite as tall and have less of a tendency to flop. You can see already that the milkweed is getting a little more robust. Here, 2020 is a view looking the other direction, but from the same side, from the driveway. In July, I've cut these, so they're still fairly short. They're not overwhelming. This is the asters here. I'll have some smooth asters in there as well as the New Englands, but the butterfly milkweed is a beautiful big patch. But by August, the butterfly milkweed has gone by. You don't see it. The New England aster has come back up. This is now looking from the neighbor's yard, so you can still see how that nice line of bricks sort of keeps separate the grass and the garden. Here's some of the tall larkspur blooming along the backside. Here it is this year, and you can see the asters blooming. They've gotten tall, but they're not terribly tall, not like the big blue stem grass, which also found its way over to the sun and gets very tall. And there are places where I have to take it out because it tends to get in the way. There it was growing straight. It turns lovely colors, so I've let it be. Again, the asters seem to be a wonderful attractant to all sorts of critters. Here in the bottom is a honeybee. At the top, a bumblebee. Get lots of bees on these. And then when they go by, this is November, this is just a couple of weeks ago, you get these beautiful fuzzy little heads. And again, especially the goldfinches will come down and pick the seeds out of those. So you'll suddenly see these things moving, and you say, "Oh, why are those things? Oh, they're the goldfinches at this time of year totally blend in, and are sitting out there picking out the seed heads on those asters." So they're a little work because I do have to cut them back a couple of times a summer, but to me, they're worth it for the beautiful blooms, the things that are attracted to them. So we didn't get rid of all of the old things at once. And I'm sort of happy that we didn't try to do too much at once. This is, several years after we started. This is 2009. Puppy dog is still around. We still have a Shasta daisy in the middle of here. So we had gotten rid of the bushes. We'd gotten rid of some of the other non-natives. At this point, we still had that Shasta daisy. Now, this is one of our favorite grasses coming up here, bottlebrush grass. I'm blanking on the name of it now. It'll come to me. So here in 2012, we've gotten rid of the daisy. We've filled in. We've got obedient plant and turtlehead. Phlox is there. And at this time of year, the phlox is not blooming yet. We have added a spiderwort. And we only put it here, but it's moved all along the edge of the walkway and jumped across the walkway to the other side. They'll move around, but if they're in the right place, one of the things that's impressed me is how many of these seem to be very long-lived, or they're reseeding themselves. I don't know which, but year after year, here it is in 2019. So we were in 2012, here's 2019. You still have the coneflowers, you still have the spiderwort, but in August it's stopped blooming. Here it is, having jumped to the other side of the path. The phlox is in bloom. You've got both the Oswego tea, the Monarda didyma, and the wild bergamot, the Monarda fistulosa blooming. We also have gotten a few things that we didn't plant. And this has been curious and sometimes welcome and sometimes not. But one of these was down in the right-hand side here, Senna hebecarpa. It popped into the yard. It suddenly was growing there around 2014. It must have come in as a seed along with some other plant. Wasn't really expecting to have it and didn't know what to do with it. Here's the Baptisia that was planted the first year back in 2006. It's doing very nicely, blooms beautifully in June. The Senna hebecarpa is actually a pretty big plant, but also very attractive when it's blooming here in August. Really took over that little chunk of the yard. And although I have to cut it back so that I can drive a car in here sometimes, I haven't had the heart to try to dig it out and cut it down. And you can see this little bunny's decided it's casting a very nice shade on the driveway, and the bunny likes it too. So that's the sunny side of the yard, although here's that maple tree growing out. So some of the things that were sun-loving plants are not doing as well here. And probably that's why some of them have seeded themselves into that strip on the other side of the driveway. I also have a backyard full of shade. And so that's been a place for all of the shade-loving early ephemerals, although these aren't all ephemeral. I want to point out on the left-hand side down low here, wild ginger. Wonderful ground cover if you're not in full sun. Part shade, full shade, and it just spreads and covers the area. The trillium, on the other hand, is blooming here in April. There was another red trillium here that's already gone by. It will disappear completely by the middle of the summer. The mayapple, if it's a damp year, will be there pretty much all the way through the season. If it's a dry year, again, it will give up partway through the year and disappear. There are ferns in here that you don't see yet because they haven't come up. Here are some of the other early ones that have been fun in the backyard. The bloodroot started as one patch. It's down over the hillside that you see on the left here. You can't quite see it in this image, but blooming at about the same time in April. This is the edge of the huge silver maple tree. And golden ragwort, another wonderful ground cover. Only blooms for a week or two in May. It's one of the early things with a wonderful bloom, but the leaves stay green almost year-round. It's just about a year-round evergreen ground cover. Golden ragwort, Pachera aurea, or Senecio aureum is the previous name for it. Wonderful, wonderful, interesting plant. Here's later on in the season in June. Now you can see the ferns coming up. So I've got some marginal wood fern, the male fern, Christmas fern, maidenhair fern. It will come up right through the ground covers and be there until frost or later. The marginal wood ferns are essentially evergreen along with the Christmas fern. Even back here, things don't stay where you put them. So this is looking now down the bank. The water would be behind me, way down to the right. Up here is our backyard. This whole terraced bank, we didn't have any access to it. It's covered with myrtle when we moved in, and a whole bunch of daylilies up at the top. Eventually, I had to stick in some steps so I could get down and work on these banks and get rid of the myrtle and get rid of the daylilies. And as we started clearing things off, the plants from up top started to move down. So here's, you saw that patch of bloodroot. On the left, you're looking down the bank and you can see just the edge of the steps. And the ants have carried the seeds and planted these bloodroots all over the bank, and even planted one in the middle of the steps. It's coming out from underneath one of the steps, halfway down those stone steps. No place that I would ever have thought of putting it myself. So it's fun to just sit there and watch and see what happens. There are also trees here that I did not plant. This on the left is tulip poplar, and on the right, an American elm. They get to about this size and then they die usually. And this one did this year. But it's been fun to watch those come in too. Don't forget shrubs. There had been a buckthorn here. We finally convinced the neighbors to take it down, and we planted a serviceberry. Blooms in May, berries in June, leaf color in the fall. This is a highlight. These are the things that are in my yard. There's a whole list that I have of everything that we've planted, or in some cases it has volunteered, like this gray dogwood and roundleaf dogwood. All the ones highlighted here are things that make berries that the birds like at different times of year. So it's been a lot of fun to be able to look out the yard and see at different times, different birds just being attracted to the berries on these bushes. Here's that rose blooming in June on the left, and with hips all over it in the fall. Here is a spice bush, Lindera benzoin. Female spice bushes will get berries. And that's the one in the back corner of the yard here next to a little bird bath. This time in September, it's covered with berries. By October, when this picture on the right was taken, the leaves are turning color, the berries are gone. Birds would just flock to that, especially gray catbirds loved those berries. But some of them get big. This is looking out a back window from our dining room down onto the male spice bush when it was very small. This is now up a floor because of the slanted shape of the property that you can walk out of the basement in the back. So this is looking down on this little spice bush in 2017. And here's a little ruby crowned kinglet that perched in it. And I could take a picture looking right out the window during spring migration. But now, 3 years later, the leaves are beautiful, but it's just about blocking the view out of that same dining room window. So they will get big if they have the right place. And this is another thing that maybe was a little too close to the house, and I've had to trim a few times to keep the view and to keep something that's manageable. So don't forget winter. I love having things out there, and try to keep them and not cut them down right in the fall, but leave them through the winter, at least until early spring. Usually when I see the next year's growth starting up, that's about when things are falling down anyway and looking a little messy, and I'll go out and trim them back down. So that's the story of how we got a yard full of native plants. We've even brought some of them in. Happy gardening. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. That was wonderful. And I've been to your garden, and it was great to see the story of it. So thank you very much. That was wonderful. And now Jennifer Staples will tell us her story.
Hello. So just a caveat, I also, at the start of my adventure, had no experience with gardening other than what my parents gave to me when I was growing up. So this has been a very interesting time for me. Now, this is my house. So this is a photo of my house in 1994. It is, in fact, the American dream. And by that, I mean, it's in Fayetteville. It's a very small house, 3-bedroom, 1-car garage. It has the gardens all around the edge of the house, just as gardens ought to be. Over here, we've got some iris growing here, bearded iris, a burning bush. We've got some cedars, tulips all along here. And on the other side, this absolutely gorgeous king crimson Norway maple tree, which is getting really big and looking terrific, and more tulips. In the back of the house, very much the same thing. Lots of tulips, another burning bush here right in the middle of the yard, lots of grass. We really love our grass. This on the edge of the photo is another Norway maple, which was small at the time, but has since then gotten very large. And as you can see, oh my gosh, the grass, isn't it gorgeous? We just took a lot of pride in keeping all of this grass growing and mowing way back into what was a forest back then. The only native things that were growing along here is these trees right in here are a couple of eastern hemlocks, and that's pretty much it. What was missing from my yard, as you might guess, is there's very, very little wildlife, and that's the way we wanted it. There weren't bugs to bother any of the trees. There weren't any kinds of deer or raccoons, opossums, because that's the way that we gardened back then. We were trying to make everything in the world stay away from our beautiful grass and all of our bushes. Might have some mosquitoes along the way and occasional deer back in the woods, but nothing really drastic. This went on for years until one day I woke up and I thought, you know, I'm not using this yard for much of anything. I don't have any trees out there. My daughter has gone off to college. She's not using the yard to play on anymore. We don't have a dog. What am I using this yard for exactly? Well, that's when it occurred to me that maybe the wildlife would like the yard. I grew up on a farm, so I'm used to wildlife, and I thought, great. What I will do is I'll just let the lawn grow. I will just let it grow and we'll see what happens. And so what happened, I did mow some parts of it, but what happened is flowers came in and I thought, ah, terrific. Somebody will be able to use the yard. Insects will be able to, but as you might guess and see, we've got some non-native Queen Anne's lace, zinnias that I put in, daylilies over here. Back in the back, you can't see, but there's a bleeding heart. There are Shasta daisies tucked in here. In addition, there are some pincushion flowers growing in some of these beds. We've got chrysanthemums. We've got some hollyhocks, double hollyhocks, because, you know, those are the best. The really complicated flowers that no bee can get into. Shasta daisies, as I mentioned over here, some sedum, some foxglove. And then we've got one little milkweed right there. And that was the beginning, but I didn't realize that it was. What happened about this time is I thought, you know, there's still no wildlife coming to my yard. Very, very few insects to be had. And so, and lots of non-native things growing. And as you might have guessed by this point, the Norway maple is getting large. And the bushes, the burning bushes are still in place because they look so spectacular in the fall. There are a lot of non-native things that are growing that I didn't invite in. And then a friend of mine gave me a book, and that was Kate Woodall. And she gave me a copy of Doug Tallamy's 2007 book, Bringing Nature Home. And it blew my mind. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. It changed my thought about gardening. It changed my thought about nature. So what I decided is, all right, all of these non-native plants are all very well and good, but they're not bringing in the insects, but native plants will. So I started doing things like leaving the leaves. This is my backyard, and there are enough trees around here, including the Norway maple, so that a lot of leaves came down on the ground. I just left them, didn't mow them, just left them. But I did take out the burning bush. That's one of them. And I took out the burning bush on the other side of the house too. And one thing I want to say to you about removing non-native things that are larger, you know, sometimes it's not as hard as you think. What I discovered with the burning bushes is I could chop off all sorts of limbs and just leave it there. And then every once in a while in the spring, I would see some sprouts come out and I just pull them off, and that's fine. And they died in a couple of years. I didn't dig out the roots. I just let them be. As a matter of fact, this one, I put a bird bath in because I thought that was hilarious that I would have a bird bath in a non-native bush hanging out right there. But I had other good things that I was doing, again, that I wasn't aware of because I was just learning about the native plant process. For example, this is a red fir back here. No, sorry, red spruce back here. Came home in a little bag from a wedding, and I stuck it in the yard. It is now a beautiful native tree, and I really love it a lot. So back to the front yard, this is when I really started letting the grass grow even more, started taking out things like the zinnias, put up a sign that tells you you're serious when you put up a sign to say, you know, pollinator habitat, and also to explain to your neighbors what all of this shagginess is. And I started planting in my various beds, various native plants. Along came things that I didn't invite, but that was fine that they did, like my sundrops right here. Now I still had some non-native things like my crane's bill, the Shasta daisies are still hanging out here, but I planted some spiderwort that's very happy here. And as you can see, the milkweed is just getting really happy and going to town. From there, the goldenrod came in, and this was a huge year. Once the goldenrod came in, it changed my yard all for the better. Now, I had already been putting in other things, like here is a lovely, very happy butterfly weed, which also is now happily spreading all over my yard. They just pop up, and as I'm out there working, I dig them up and put them someplace where I want them to be when they're small, because they have long tap roots, so they don't like being moved when they get bigger. But in addition, I had all of this goldenrod coming in, and lots of different kinds. Now, some people get nervous about letting goldenrod, Canada goldenrod, grow in their yard because it is tall, it is bushy, it spreads like crazy. And my yard at this point is to the point where I'm what my friend calls, my other native plant friend calls, editing some of my beds. I'm moving some of those goldenrods, I'm pulling them up because they're just getting a little bit too aggressive. But I would like to recommend to you common wrinkled leaf goldenrod, zigzag goldenrod, and showy or slender goldenrod. And I'm going to copy these with their with their Latin names just to pop into the chat, just in case that's something you would like. One of the advantages of these goldenrods is that they are smaller, and they have the ability to, let me get rid of this screen here. They don't take over nearly as much as the Canada goldenrod does. So all the goldenrod came in, all different kinds. I have probably 5 or 6 different kinds that I know about. And a lot of other plants came in as well at the same time. This is my house in the fall with the goldenrod in full bloom. Now I've got a lot of sweet coneflower in there, which I've since determined is not native to this area. I thought I would leave it anyway because there are some areas nearby where it is native, but honestly, it gets very little activity from insects. So I'm in the process of taking some of that out. This is the back of my house. Now, the beauty of the back of the house is the neighbors don't come back here. I deliberately put in paths, which is what this is right here. And since then I have mulched those so that they are distinctive, so that I can get into some of my beds. And it looks like what it actually is, that I am intentionally gardening everything. And that's a big point to some of the neighbor comments and laws that I've encountered since then. But the back of my yard, because it is not evident to neighbors, I have let go much more. So many surprises, so many interesting trees and bushes that have come up on their own. Now I'm adding to them, of course, but there's just a delightful number of plants that are growing back here. And behind me, if you were standing looking the way that I am, I've got a small woods that are growing because I bought a couple of small plots that were empty back behind my house, and I'm growing a woods where the woods is not terribly healthy. There are a lot of big trees, but there are no little trees, there are no medium trees. So I am trying to make that woods healthy. What came to my yard on its own? My boneset, love boneset. Jewelweed, of course. Great blue lobelia. It just travels all over my yard. I see it many places where I didn't expect it. New England asters. There's a little bee visiting that, and all kinds of colors, pinks and purples. This is the wrinkled leaf goldenrod that I told you about. It doesn't get more than maybe 3 feet, maybe 4 feet, but it has this spectacular bloom. And I love that. There's the Canada goldenrod in all of its glory as well. Of course, penstemon, the golden Alexander, which I love. As Dave said, it has such a beautiful bloom, and it's also got these great leaves as well. My trillium, one trillium chugging along, doing its thing, and I'm hoping that it will get bigger and bushier. We shall see. These are oxeye sunflowers. I love these, but I've got to tell you, they are one plant that grows really tall. And I exercise what Dave was talking about, which is the Chelsea chop, around about end of July, or excuse me, end of May, and sometime into June, maybe early July, where I will cut back plants by 1/3 to 1/2, depending on the plant. I've been successful doing that with asters, with goldenrod, and I'm going to try it next year with this oxeye sunflower, because it will bush out these plants, make them less tall, less gangly. They may tend to bloom a little bit later than they would if you had not cut them back. So one of the things that you can do if you have a large stand of something that's going to get tall is cut back the plants on the outer edge. And what they will do is they will, by cutting them back, that makes them shorter and bushier, and they will hold up the plants that are in the middle. So the plants in the middle will bloom at their regular time, and the plants around the edge will bloom at a little bit later time. So you actually get a longer period of blooms. Of course, I have swamp milkweed and my butterfly weed, which I'm getting lots of little stands of, and I'm very excited about that. More of the sun drops, and then they arrived. And I was so excited, especially this past year was the first time I had lots of monarch caterpillars all over the place. Big ones, little ones, chewing up my milkweed to beat the band and becoming monarchs. The monarchs absolutely adore the asters and the goldenrod. And I have to tell you, one of the reasons I'm keeping the goldenrod is what many of you already know. There are as many as 104 species of butterflies and moths that use it as a host plant. There are 42 species of bees that are goldenrod specialists. In other words, that's all that they feed on. So that to me makes it a powerful plant and one that I really want to encourage. I also had other butterflies, and this blew my doors off as well. The black swallowtail, the great spangled fritillary, which I just adore, came to my yard. Eastern tiger swallowtail. This little guy turns into a fairly boring moth, but it is an excellent, excellent caterpillar. It's a brown hooded owlet. The moth itself is sort of tannish brown and not very interesting, but the caterpillar is great. And of course, other things too. This is a Fowler's toad and an eastern cottontail that came to hang out in my beds. What's not here, of course, is the milk snake that scared the heck out of my cat one day, and dragonflies, who are absolute voracious hunters. Their kill rate is astoundingly high for insects, and they do come around as long as you've got other insects that they can hunt. So it's like one thing after another that will come around. Lots and lots of birds. Honestly, I don't put up a bird feeder anymore because I have so many things that the birds are feeding on. And I think that my gardens are a really healthy way for them to eat. So after all of this, what kinds of reactions do I get? I have gotten lots of reactions from my neighbors. For example, there was a little old fellow from down the road who got on his riding mower and drove all the way down to my yard to ask me whether my mower was broken or not. And I said, no, it's not broken. I'm doing this purposefully. So I told him all about that. I've had several kids who would want to come in and try and identify different bees in my yard. Or there were a couple of kids, a brother and sister, who every time they walked by, they wanted to know how tall my thistle was. And they wanted to go stand by it and get their picture taken. And that was very cool. I've had families that have come by, particularly young families, to stop and say, thank you so much for what you're doing, which is all very, very heartening. However, the other party that became involved in my yard or interested in my yard was the town of Manlia's code enforcement officer. So my yard has been cited twice for code enforcement issues. And what it's based on is the International Property Maintenance Code. That is a code that can be used nationwide, and it is used nationwide by all sorts of municipalities to dictate how your lawn should look, how tall your grasses should be. And what that says is, except for as provided in a statute, a local law, an ordinance, or other regulation, all developed areas of a premises that are intended to be used by building occupants or the public shall be maintained free of weeds, and we'll talk about that in a second, in excess of 10 inches. Noxious weeds shall be prohibited. They actually define weeds. It's uncultivated vegetation such as grass, brush, briar, and annual plants, excluding trees, cultivated vegetation, shrubs such as shrubs, flowers, gardens, and vegetation used for agricultural purpose. Now, the town of Manlius has adopted this code. But one of the interesting things about this is I put my lawyer hat on when I read this code and I got my first letter. The code does not define what cultivation is. It doesn't say pulling weeds, doesn't say watering, it doesn't say growing in a certain manner. It does not define it. It doesn't define this beyond what I told you, what a weed is. It has lots of exceptions, like cultivated vegetation. It doesn't define what a noxious weed is. Now, we do have definitions from New York State and from the federal government as to what those are. So one of the things that I'm going to point out is an excellent article that questions, and I agree with this question, whether or not this law is void for vagueness. As a person operating in the world, you can't be obliged to abide by a law unless you've been given enough information to say what you should or should not be doing. If the law is particularly vague, then it's not fair to tell you to abide by it because you don't know what it is. And I believe that this law is void for vagueness. So the code enforcement, the first time in 2019, sent me a letter. And they said, they told me that all of the premises needed to be maintained free from weeds or plant growth in excess of 10 inches, no noxious weeds. And they gave me the definition for weeds. And then they said, you are hereby ordered to mow your entire front, side, and rear yards. Well, that's not what the law says. The law doesn't make me mow everything as long as I am having cultivated gardens, which I propose that I am. So my response to that was I was going to mow every place where it wasn't a garden bed. And in my mind, that was anything that I couldn't take care of. And there was a good deal in the front that I didn't feel I was handling well. So I thought, okay, I'll mow that area. I also told them that I was going to take out some large plants that were growing there that I suspected neighbors didn't care for. As it turned out, that was rough hawksweed by and large, which is a non-native plant anyway, so I was going to take it out anyway. And the third thing that I did was I took bricks and I put them around my garden beds. One thing that I didn't say to them, but what I have done, is the bricks were leftover bricks from my walkway, and I had plenty of them, and I simply set them around where my garden beds were, set them on top of the ground. The bricks sink down after a period of time, which is fine. That means that, you know, I can mow up to them and I can trim up to them, but it also means that I can take those bricks and I can move them around. If I want to make a bigger bed, which I have been doing, if I feel I can handle more, then I can change what that garden looks like very easily. So I didn't bother to dig them into the ground. When I did all of that, they came back and they said they were very impressed with what I did. It was a great job and thank you very much. Now notice, I didn't touch the backyard because I was ready to make the argument that all of this backyard was being maintained as cultivated gardens by me, and I had no reason to live up to any obligation to mow all of that down. They didn't seem to mind that, so we chugged on. Second time I got a notice was actually last year. Now, we've had a change of administration in the town of Manlius, and right now our town board and the code enforcement officer are, they're very liberal. They are very pro-environment. So I have that in my corner, and you may not have that in your particular area where you're gardening. But I got a letter from the new code enforcement officer, which again said what all the laws were. And it said in a much more kind fashion, please remember that you need to mow paths through the yard and immediately next to the structure. What he was referring to is I participated in No Mow May. Now, I am not an advocate of No Mow May as a solution to the problem of lack of diversity in our insects and our animals and our birds. No Mow May, in my estimation, is a great way to get people talking about planting more native plants. But it's not a solution, because if you don't mow your lawn, what you'll get is what I had the first time I didn't mow my lawn, was a heck of a lot of grass and a heck of a lot of non-native plants. So, but I had participated because I wanted to put a sign out front. I wanted people to look at my lawn and think about No Mow May and maybe talk about it as well. So I wrote a very nice letter back to the new code enforcement officer, congratulated him on being in his new position, and said that I absolutely would be mowing as of June 1st. and trimming everything up, and everything would look terrific. And that's the last I heard from that. So one of the things that inspired me to do what I did is an article that was written by Brett Rappaport. He was a former Wild Ones president, and he's an attorney. He wrote an excellent article, and there's going to be a page of all of my citations where you can find all of this information available to you. But he wrote an article in the Wild Ones booklet in 2004. And one of the things that he said, when you're dealing with neighbors, and hence the code enforcement officer, one of the things that you ought to do is listen to the word brash, because it will give you ideas of things that you ought to pay attention to doing when you want to get along with folks and grow native plants. The first one is borders. Put up borders to show your intentional gardens. This is not just grass growing here. I am taking care of this particular patch. And the border can be anything. It can be fences. It can be bricks laid on the ground. Apparently, it worked for me, and it was very simple. The second one is the letter R, recognize the rights of others. I live in a sea of grass. The neighbors all around me love their grass lawns to differing extents. You know, some of them are very particular about their grass and some are a little less, but it's all grass. That's their land. They have the right to do that. I also have the right to do what I'm doing, and I have the ability to talk to them about what I'm doing and why I think that grass is a silly way to help the environment, but the method that I'm using, encouraging lots of native plants, is a very reasonable and useful way. The third one is A, advertise. Tell people every time I'm out in my gardens, I always talk to my neighbors. I go and pat their dogs. I tell them what I'm doing. They will often ask questions. I put up signs, but not a lot of signs, enough so that they might stop and take a look. And there's going to come a point in this neighborhood where I'm going to open up the neighborhood to see if they're interested in having a garden tour, so that we can talk more about that. And maybe I can hand out some pamphlets about, you don't have to do what I've done, but maybe you would like to plant a couple of simple plants, maybe a little patch of native plants, and why it's so important. So advertising and talking to your neighbors is a really good idea. The S, I didn't adhere to. The S is start small. I did not start small. I just let the whole blessed thing go. Now, it has its advantages. I have gotten free plants from nature, native plants that I never anticipated getting, and they have just done wonderfully. The downside is, instead of, putting in a nice mulched area and planting my plants in there, I have a lot of grass that I have to battle. Now, the good news is native plants are really good at that. And there are areas in my front yard, particularly, where asters and goldenrods have just taken over and there's no grass to be had. So I'm not sure I would recommend what I did unless you're up for the adventure. And I am very glad that I did this adventure, and I'm really pleased that it's gotten to the point where it is. So the last one is humanize, H. And that's simple. Just put a couple of chairs out there, sit out and read a book. I've got a little stone frog out front that I put out just to make it look cute. Maybe you put a bird bath out, something, again, to look like this is all intentional and something that you wanted to do to make the yard look terrific and interesting. For those that want it, there is an excellent article that was in the John Marshall Law Review in 1993, also written by Brett Rappaport, and it makes some excellent arguments against the weed laws that we have in this country that are all based on that one law that I said. And he also makes the point that it appears that law, without being more specific and more detailed, is void for vagueness. Sometimes I get folks that say it looks like a lot of work. Well, I don't think it is. And here's the reason I don't think it is. I don't feel an obligation to keep my lawn nice and neat. It is a habitat. That's why it looks the way that it looks. I have an obligation to do as much as I want to, or as little as I want to. For example, I know buckthorn is a horrible, horrible plant. I'm out to get all the buckthorn off of my property. And so I will go out with vengeance in the spring and pull buckthorn and cut buckthorn and bag buckthorn, all of that sort of stuff. But some of the other plants that are non-native and invasive, I'm letting nature help me, because there are some plants that are native that will absolutely crowd out some of these non-native plants. And I'm always looking out for those. So I plant some native plants that will do some crowding and then let nature take off. I try not to let it worry me that things look too shaggy or overgrown. If it is, that might mean that there's something there that is going to be really helpful for insects or birds or mammals. So my takeaway for you for all of this is you can let large parts of your area go native, but just remember, it might take a few years for native plants to come in. It did for me, but I'm just ecstatic that it did. And all of those things that don't show up readily, I've found places where I want them. I've plopped them down. I've given them the best start that I can, and I'm hoping for the best. Some of them will last and some of them won't. Consider the parameters of brash. I think they're important, especially educating your neighbors. Don't be intimidated by code enforcement. The law really is poorly written, and you have the right to push back on it. Now, the only downside is if you are sadly in an area where you've got a rampant code enforcement officer and neighbors, because it's neighbors who will call in the code enforcement office to tell them that they don't think that your yard is living up to the code. If you have a tough pushback, there may be an only solution, and that is to go to court, and that is expensive, and it may not be a good solution. But I've read more and more articles about people in Chicago, people in Massachusetts, who have pushed back against their laws and been successful. And then, you know, the neighborhoods and the town boards have then changed their mind because of the way that the laws appear to be going, where the way that the nation is appearing to be going towards more environmental friendly and appropriate ways for us to manage wildlife and handle our yards. And the last one I'd say is let nature help you. You know, you have little trees that come up in yard. Before you take them out, consider that might be a really great place for a tree. And look, it's a native tree. I've had several red oaks come up in my yard, and they are terrific, and I'm letting them grow. One of them, as a matter of fact, in this very last picture, is right here. Now, it's not nearly as tall as it is right now. I'd say it's probably about 10 feet tall, maybe 12 feet tall. It's going to town like crazy, and it came up on its own, and I just left it. So that's my adventure. I hope that you've got some things that you can think about, take away with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer and David. Lots to take in there. I'm wondering if anyone has anything, and I don't see anything in the Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? It's awfully quiet. I don't see any hands raised either.
I'll pop in with one.
Okay.
So I have heard about the Chelsea chop, and I think I need to do it because my frost asters and coneflowers and some of the sunflowers were so tall it was ridiculous. Do you all think that that is something you can try with any species of aster or goldenrod? And what about coneflowers?
I know it'll absolutely work with asters and goldenrod
Uh-huh.
because I've done it. I don't know about coneflowers, but my thought is try it.
Yeah, it would work with coneflowers. It's, you just have to do it before they're fully budded up with, and they don't set their buds until, well, with coneflowers, beginning of June, beginning of July, thereabouts.
Thank you.
My experience with my family, because mine is more like Jennifer. I did sort of a I have a large patch in I have a corner lot, and I let that large patch just sort of fill itself in. But I have it also labeled as being a habitat, but I have it bordered. I have it bordered and very nicely, thinking about the neighborhood, all grass around it, carefully edged and mowed around there. So, but interestingly, the first person who looked at that, came in summertime and talked to my son. My daughter talked to my son and said, "Has mom gone round the bend?" She thought that I had gone sort of nuts by letting this go wild. And I said, "That's my meadow. I have a meadow in the side yard." That was like the second or third year. Interestingly, in Virginia, she lives in a townhouse community, and she has a postage stamp of a front yard. And I mean a postage stamp of a front yard. They have stopped mowing their postage stamp to see what comes up, because she understood finally what I was doing. So people can change, but people do stop along my street. I've never been approached by the town of Clay. I've never been approached by the town. The town is so huge, though. I doubt that that anyone's going to be paying attention to my tiny little lot. So
I do have to say also that the reason the first time that I got called into code enforcement didn't have anything to do with the code enforcement officer, and I suspect it wouldn't be in any of your neighborhoods. It's your neighbors. They will come around and they will take a look. And when I talked to the young fellow who came out to look at my yard and see what was going on, I said, I understand it's one of my neighbors who has said that they really don't appreciate this yard and they want you to do something about it. But I'm really sad that they didn't talk to me, because I would then chat with them and find out, what don't you like about this? And let's discuss it. He said, actually, it's not anybody in your neighborhood. It's somebody in several neighborhoods over, and they called in 5 different yards, nowhere near where they lived. They just apparently were driving around looking for shaggy yards.
yeah.
People need hobbies. I don't know.
Jennifer and Dave, we now have some questions in Q&A. If you can open that up and start.
And there are 9 things in chat. You see chat?
The
Yep.
things in chat are not Q&A.
No, we
Yeah,
have
no, I
we have
know.
3 questions in Q&A, and if you can't see them, I can read them to you.
I can't see them, so please do.
Okay. The first one was Nancy saying that she's considering flowering dogwood.
Great bush. Love a flowering dogwood.
So, I mean, there are a lot of dogwoods that are native, and then there are a lot of them that are non-native. And it's actually much easier to get a hold of the Coosa dogwoods, the Cornus moss, Cornelian cherry dogwoods than it is to get native dogwoods. The Cornus Florida, which is the traditionally gardened dogwood, beautiful, but also more susceptible to some fungus attacks, so that they tend to not live very long in most urban environments. But there are shrub dogwoods of all sorts that will grow just about anywhere. Gray dogwood, red osier dogwood, roundleaf dogwood. But by being shrubs, I mean, they will tend to form lots of stems and keep on growing larger. There's also the pagoda dogwood. That's alternate leaf dogwood, alternifolia, Cornus alternifolia. that's a small tree, and it's a beautiful understory tree that you'll see out in the woods if you go out to Baltimore woods or wherever. Makes a very nice tree. If it gets at least some sun, it can live in almost full shade. But if it gets some sun, it will flower and have some nice berries. So that's one to consider.
I have a pagoda dogwood that's
Right.
very nice.
Yeah.
Doesn't grow huge, has berries, very nice.
Catherine just put in a note saying that she's got a bunch of dogwoods that are volunteers, and so do I, all over my yard. I've planted some dogwoods, but I've also got volunteers. But I'll also throw this into the chat. When I'm uncertain, this is my particular go-to place, but when I'm uncertain if something is native or not to my area, I take a look at the New York Floral Atlas, and I've given you a link there. It's an excellent site. It's got all sorts of scientific knowledge behind it for checking out what your plants are. Are they native or not? And I've been surprised by some that were and some that weren't. So that's another place where you can check on your dogwoods.
Hey, Brad asked, do you remove the grass? To what depth?
So if you're talking about, do I remove grass when I'm putting in a new plot of changing it from yard to garden? Yeah, but mostly just, it's not very deep. The roots don't go very deep on most of the typical lawn grasses, the European lawn grasses. So I'll pull it up in clods and shake all the dirt out of it and save that, and throw the grass in my mulch pile. I have in some places where it's a bigger area and you're trying to do this over time, cover all the grass with a couple layers of cardboard, especially if you can get some cardboard that doesn't have tape all over it. And then pile 3-4 inches of some nice mulch, preferably something that's not got a lot of weed seeds in it, if you can get it. And then leave it for a season. And then you can usually just plant right in there, and it'll be fine. It's adding something, especially if you have really terrible compacted soil that's hard to plant in otherwise because it's been roadside or driven on or something like that.
If I have grass that hasn't gone to seed, if it's just grass, and I want to put together a bed well in advance of planting, like the season before, what I've done in the past is, cut out the grass where I am, like Dave says, you don't have to go too far down. I just then take that clump of grass, shake off all the dirt that I can, turn it upside down and put it back and chop it up a little bit. By the time the next season comes, it's dead and or turning to dirt. And so I don't have to fill in with any additional dirt. So that's worked for me. Clearly from my pictures, I haven't killed a lot of grass. I've mostly just let it go. And I should, with the last bit of grass that I have in my front yard, I am going to try the method of putting down cardboard with mulch on top and seeing what I can kill and whether or not I like that method. So experiment.
Depends on the grass too. If you have a lot of weedy things in there, clover's great, but you can have long-lived seeds in there too that will keep on coming up. And so if you can at least minimize the amount of that, you have less of a battle to get introduced plants if you're specifically introducing them to thrive and fill in and start shading out. Once they're dense and they're shady, then those seeds don't germinate anymore.
Absolutely right. And just recall, when you're trying to get rid of grass or any non-native plant or whatever, if you think your job is done because you've pulled everything out, there's a good chance it's not. Seed banks, the seeds that are under the ground, live a long time. They can live for, some of them, for decades, hanging out there waiting for you to turn your back, and then all of a sudden something you didn't plant comes up. Just don't worry about it. Figure it out. I mean, if you don't like what came up, it's really troublesome, then you can start working on that. But you will have non-native plants come along where you didn't intend them to come.
So there's a question about how much do you worry about things going wild and then not knowing whether they are native or not. That is a problem if you have things popping up. And partly it depends. There are some native plants that Jennifer is happy with. I've got just a small enough property. I tend to just take out Canada goldenrod or common milkweed because it will take over an entire plot, and I don't have that much to work with. So then it's interesting as it stands, but it's only interesting for a little chunk of the year, and it doesn't actually provide the complexity that I'd like to maintain in a little area. But there are phone apps where you can take a picture of something and it'll tell you just like that what it is.
Doug Tallamy says, make your yards about 70% native, which I think is a good goal. You know, when I first started down this path, I'm like, I'm going to get rid of all non-native plants. You can't do that. It's because think about what's on all sides of you, all sorts of other places where non-native plants are growing. So I think 70% is a pretty good goal. And Dave is right. It's particular and individual to your particular yard. I've got a forest back there. I can grow a whole lot of tall, weedy stuff back there, and that's great. But my front yard, like I say, this last patch of grass, I'm going to tend to load it up with smaller non-native or native plants because that's where the neighbors are, and I'm trying to grow something that they won't complain about or be upset about. So every yard is particular to where you live and what you want to have happen.
So you all ready to go out there and
Go get them.
on into
I've got to tell you, I'm getting ready to do some winter gardening, so don't think that your season is done. And my winter gardening involves going out and checking on some trees or bushes that I've got caged because I want to give them a chance to get a foothold before the deer come in. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to plant a mother bed where I put some seeds in pots dug into the ground so that they can start, you know, they can hang out for the winter and then come up in the spring, and hopefully I'll get new plants. So there's always something that you can do out there if you want to. Don't let it take over your life. Just, you know, enjoy it as much as you want to enjoy it, and nature will handle it.
one other thought. Some things travel long distances. Their seeds will blow in the wind. They'll come in. You may be in a place where you don't think there's anything around you that's going to give you seeds that would be native plants. You'll get those. You'll get shrubs from the birds eating the berries and then coming over and sitting in your yard if there's something for them to sit on. If there's no tree, then they're not going to be there. But you can get those. However, there are plants that do not move very far, very fast at all. And the spring ephemerals, many of those are in that category. They're carried by ants 3 feet from the plant, and then they're planted. If you don't want to get those, they're not going to come from even 50 feet away. It'll take you 200 years for them to move that 50 feet away. You've got to bring those in. So go to a reputable place like the Plantsman and get those plants there and put them in. Then they'll start spreading in your yard, the mayapple, the ginger, you know. Yep. But they're not going to come in on their own.